Good evening and welcome to episode 43 of the Political Mike podcast. We still have a lot going on in the news right now, and I'm so excited to have the panelists that I do have for this evening. We're still seeing continued unfolding unrest in the region, Afghanistan. We're also seeing the House making progressive moves towards furthering the president's agenda, all at the backdrop of now the Senate having the ball in their court, as the filibuster seems to be the looming threat against the Democrats' new efforts to enact voting rights legislation. We're also experiencing a situation where the Department of Justice, under a new Democratic president, seems to be taking a very strange stance against the previous administration's imposed restrictions. And we also have a situation where the president is getting some criticism from his allies on Capitol Hill for not taking a more progressive stance on voting rights. Here to help me make sense of it all are four very distinguished, very accomplished, and very intelligent individuals, and I want to introduce them at this time to you. So I want to go ahead and introduce someone who's now a new guest to the Political Mike podcast, Mr. Ismail Abraham. Ismail is a Black American Muslim who was born and raised on the south side of Chicago, Illinois. He's a recent graduate of Howard University School of Law and is scheduled to begin practicing as an associate at a law firm in Chicago. Ismail worked for the Investor Justice and Education Clinic during his time at Howard Law, and the scope of his work and his new firm is centered around the capital markets and finance generally. Ismail, it's a privilege and honor to have you here, man. I'm so excited to see what you're going to bring to the table. We also have Ms. Tia Toombs, who attends Oakwood University, majoring in pre-law. Ms. Toombs is a young advocate and leader in her community. And in recent years, she served as the 28th Miss Oakwood University and president of the Oakwood University NAACP chapter. Tia, thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Nate Honore, regular face to this platform, is a law student at Quinnipiac University. He's now a 3L. He has a passion for human rights as well. So Nate, thanks for being here. And last but certainly not least at all is Ms. Jasmine Bonner, who was born and raised in the Gateway to the West, St. Louis, Missouri. Upon graduation from one of two historically Black colleges and universities in Missouri, Harris-Stowe State University, Jasmine moved to Washington, D.C. To pursue a career serving the people of her hometown as a congressional intern for former Congressman William Lacey Clay Jr. of Missouri's 1st District. And after the completion of her internship, she became the staff assistant for Congressman Jerry Nadler, New York's 10th District. And he's also the chairman of the House Committee on the Judiciary. Currently, Jasmine serves as a special assistant for the United States Senator Tammy Duckworth. And because she served in these roles over the last 3 or 4 years now, Jasmine witnessed essential hearings that laid the foundation for the case of the impeachment of President Donald Trump. She is also someone who is she is also one of very few personal staffers to be present on the Senate floor during the impeachment proceedings. So she has had a front row to history. So Jasmine, thanks for being here. I'm excited to have each of you back. And for those of you who are here for the first time, I'm excited to have you here for this week. So I want to open up the conversation about the fight for voting rights. This past Tuesday, of course, the House Democrats had a vote, and they went ahead with, strict party lines to enact the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Now, this is also coming at the backdrop of the For the People Act being stalled in the Senate, being filibustered in the Senate. But the vote here similarly was also along party lines. And so my question is it inevitable? Is it inevitable that this bill will experience the same fate when it gets to the next chamber of Congress, the Senate? Anyone can jump in.
I think it's probably, from what I've been reading, it's destined to kind of like stall out there. But yeah, but personally, just to I'm not sure if it goes too much off your prompt, but I would be curious to see whether Congress could try to if the main purpose of the John Lewis bill was to try to like, really put the teeth back into the Voting Rights Act, which was kind of greatly hampered by the Shelby decision, maybe Congress can maybe just take up the court's direction given in Shelby and actually try to reestablish some the formula, update the formula that the court said that held Shelby back, and then maybe that's the way that could maybe sidestep the Senate roadblock.
Um, I would like to say that I worked as a poll worker actually in Madison County, Huntsville, Alabama, and I've seen voter suppression firsthand. Poll workers turning people away for small mistakes or little things that could be fixed in time, and it's really disheartening to see firsthand. So me personally, I would like to see this bill passed. I have personal you know um, giving misgivings about the GOP suppressing the vote, because I think that right now they they know that that's the only way that they can win. Um, Minorities are becoming a majority in this country, as we know from the census, and it's just hard to see all of our hard work go down the drain. Um, so, yeah, it's the party lines are, I mean, they're obviously going to vote along party lines, but then there's few like Liz Cheney and Mitt Romney that I hope will see ethically within their hearts, regardless of political motivations, to see this thing through.
And you're talking about the in terms of how the Congress, uh, the congressmen and women voted. You're talking about 219 Democrats voting for the bill, 212 opposing Republicans. And all of this, of course, is taking place while the ongoing crisis in Afghanistan is unfolding. And so it was interesting that on this past Tuesday, the president was set initially to address the public at a specific time. And of course, that time kept getting pushed back further and further and further. And when he finally addressed the public, I believe it was around after 5 p.m., he started by giving his appreciation to Speaker Pelosi, saying, he wants to thank her for her masterful leadership. And I thought that was very noteworthy, because when you're looking at when you're looking at how this whole bill even was able to get a vote on the Senate floor, Speaker Pelosi is very tactful in terms of making sure she has the votes before she moves forward with anything. Despite how many folks give their opinions and how many pundits make their predictions, she does not conduct a vote until she's 100% sure she has the votes. And so there's I thought that was noteworthy, because a lot of times we think the House leadership is old. You're talking about Steny Hoyer, Jim Clyburn, Nancy Pelosi. They're up in age, all of them. Let's replace them with newer, fresher faces. But newer and younger doesn't necessarily mean the same results. This is someone who is obviously very experienced at being at the helm of the ship, steering it in the way she wants it to go. They have a legislative agenda. And remember, this is going to be, you're also talking about the infrastructure package. We're going to get to that shortly. But the voting rights bill, the John Lewis bill, the infrastructure, these are centerpieces of President Biden's legislative agenda that will set the tone for the rest of his term, whether it's 4 years or 8 years. And so it's very important to think about the political landscape, in my view, with that respect. So if it gets filibustered in the Senate, can the Democrats do anything about it, in your view?
Technically, or no, sorry, let me give someone else a chance to jump in. Sorry.
The question is, can they or will they? This is a party that has a very narrow majority in the Senate, and unfortunately, a few races in a few states didn't go the way everyone hoped they would. But that's where leadership is supposed to rise. I am one of the people. The House does need new leadership. The current leadership trio, all when they came back into leadership in 2018, did agree that after this next cycle, they would step back and let other people take the reins. But for what it's worth, Nancy Pelosi is effective in making sure that her party, that the people who defect only defect after she, are only allowed to defect after she's ensured that she has the votes she needed. This is someone who's shepherded the Affordable Care Act through Congress at a time when it looked very unsteady, who led the party through the Trump shutdown and led the American Rescue Plan. So, I trust in her ability to deliver votes when it matters, even if I don't always like the way she votes and things she votes on. But as it turns to the Senate, there's not that same kind of edge that the leadership team of Chuck Schumer as Senate Majority Leader and Dick Durbin as Majority Whip had. Leadership is doing the hard thing, and the both of them don't really have a strong track record at keeping the caucus unified on key votes. Under Durbin, for example, while Durbin has been Senate Majority Whip for a while now, Joe Manchin voted for Kavanaugh, for example, and for Gorsuch. They might be, the way things have shaken out, they might be the leaders on paper, Dick Durbin and Chuck Schumer, they might be the leaders of this caucus on paper. And Joe Biden might be the leader of the Democratic Party on paper, but when it comes down to it, the leaders of the party and the people who have the most responsibility, who can take the biggest role in ensuring that the agenda passes or fails, are Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. And they're really kind of allowed to do whatever they want to do and without really fear of reprisal. Even a suggestion from Schumer or any member of the Democratic caucus and leadership, not just in the formal roles of Majority Leader and Whip, but Vice Chair and any other roles, just saying if you don't support our agenda, you don't get access to our fundraising, would send a message that they take voting rights seriously, that they take judicial reform seriously, that they take staking out a consistent position on the filibuster seriously. The White House does also have to take a greater role in combating voter suppression and pushing the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the For the People Act through Congress, because previously kind of the position that President Biden has taken is more, well, we just need to organize. But that's kind of an empty thing to say. You can't tell people to vote if you're not going to do anything with the majority that they give you. And then when things like this happen, where it's absolutely crucial that the Democrats keep the majority, it's absolutely crucial that the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the For the People Act are able to pass. Otherwise, you can say goodbye to Raphael Warnock in Georgia. You can say goodbye to Mark Kelly in Arizona, who needs to run again next year as well. You could probably say goodbye to Catherine Cortez Masto in Nevada, who's also up for re-election next year.
Do you think the results? Do you think the effects are really that direct and that dispositive or conclusive? Like, if this doesn't happen, that will happen.
Well, the Senate's tied right now, so one net loss is the majority. But also the scary thing about the Georgia bill is that it allows the state legislators to take over county voting boards. And that's already happening in Fulton County, which is the Democrats' power base in Georgia. So, you can say, even though Raphael Warnock has that community support as the senior pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church, when, you can just take over the county voting board, there's not a lot that you can really do. But, there needs to be
we still have like constitutions, like they still have to operate within the bounds of the constitution. Like, it's not like when they get the board, they can do whatever.
Well, yeah, but constitutional norms are only as strong as the people who enforce them. We all lived through past.
Yeah, of course.
We understand
that. But no more. Even the conservatives on the court would establish some kind of floor for voting rights that I think would not allow just people to run roughshod over other people. So I think it's
the conservatives on the court are the same people who said, well, since pre-clearance is working now, pre-clearance doesn't need to work anymore.
No, I thought what they said was that they haven't tried to update the formula for decades. And so to keep using old data is not objectively defensible on some level.
Nate?
Sorry. The point the effect that the ruling had was basically saying, well, pre-clearance has worked for so long, but we don't need these guidelines anymore. And, even in Justice Ginsburg's dissent, she said it had the effect of saying, well, because I'm not getting wet, I don't need my umbrella anymore. So, our norms are only as strong as we allow them to be. So without
Yeah.
bills to make sure that restrictive statewide voting bill, without federal action to make sure that restrictive statewide voting bills aren't allowed to proceed, the very narrow majority that Democrats have in the House becomes more and more precarious, especially as Democrats didn't do as well in the midterms as in the past election as they hoped. So a bunch of state legislatures majorities were not gained. So as far
But
as
why
regional
though? I'm just not as quick to infer the why as to the voting hurdles. Why there may be some hurdles. I don't want the Democrats to focus on a procedural hurdles when they can maybe focus on substantive issues and get people to come out in such numbers where it'll make the procedural things, somewhat less of a factor.
Well, I think the numbers argument is answered by this past election where people voted in record numbers and yet still Biden only won because of very narrow margins in a handful of states where despite massive turnout, Democrats lost over 20 seats in the House. Despite massive turnout, in a cycle where Democrats were projected to pick up 4 or 5 seats, they only picked up, 3.
I want Jasmine to weigh in on this. Jasmine, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm listening, and I may not know all of the legal information that you all are discussing, but I mean, in terms of politics and how this plays out, when you're not voting as a party or you're not voting together, that has a big consequence later on down the line. I mean, we saw it when we picked up all of those seats in 2018 and how that affected the House because Democrats had one message, and that was healthcare, making sure people understood what was going on and why you should be voting Democrat, that we have your back, that we want to make sure that you have healthcare, that we want to make sure your kids are able to go to college. When you're coming together and you're out here spreading this message as a party, that breeds results. And because of some members kind of wanting to take their own route and saying, hey, I don't agree with the minimum wage, or I don't agree with, the spending bill. You're going to see that because people are going to start feeling that in their pockets. They're going to start feeling that when they have to get ready to pay that copay that they, didn't have to pay last year when you see their insurance and stuff is going up. So on the political sense, all of this is going to have some type of repercussion if members are not coming together and having a clear message.
Also, to the political point, voting reform is something that pulls very well with voters. So, just to show that, we, the party in control, are, committed to doing something, especially among Democratic voters, and that's who you need to show up in 2020. In 2022, excuse me.
I was going to also say this. We're the only party when we get into a position of leadership that's always playing very timid, that is not stepping out and moving the way that the Republicans move. They will bogart and push through stuff that will not have any type of Democratic support, and they're unapologetic about it. Unless the Democrats start moving that way, we're going to continue to see people like those 2 members that you mentioned that are going to have the keys in their hands to the castle and not vote with the party. They don't feel like they have anything to lose at this point, and that's the reason why they continue to do the things that they do.
I think Tia was going to say something. Tia?
That's the characteristics of the hetero white male. And we know that they rule the GOP. That's just their characteristic that they display constantly. And the GOP, that's how they get things done. I would like to see the Democrats be more aggressive, but to Nathan's point, we don't have a voter turnout issue. We have a voter suppression issue. And unless we get this done, there's not going to be a majority in the midterms. Like, point blank period, we're losing. And the system has always been rigged. They're continuing to rig it. And this is one of the most important pieces of legislation before the midterms come around.
So what's interesting about the John Lewis bill in terms of what difference is there between the For the People Act, the John Lewis voting bill was actually more specifically targeted at reforming remember the 2013 Shelby versus Holder decision, which really said that states can't be discriminated against. Remember, before 2013, we had a situation because of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 where states who, according to, I believe, Section 4B and Section 5 of that act, states that wanted to make any change at all had to go through a preclearance process. States that had a history of discrimination. And so they're saying basically, look, if we're going to treat states that had this history different from states that didn't, that of course violates the states' rights. And so we had staffers, we had House members and their staffers come up together to try to create a piece of legislation that would survive any kind of judicial scrutiny that would end up in the courts. And so that's what this is. We're talking about, a lot of legal jargon. That's what the crux of this battle comes down to. And so my next question would be, look, can the Democrats just do like a Hail Mary and focus on having a carve-out exception for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act to get past this barrier that is the filibuster? Look, I mean, you have Joe Manchin, like Nate promised. You had Kristen Sinema going to The View saying she doesn't believe in doing away with the filibuster. So, okay, if we're not going to do away with the filibuster, can we do a carve-out exception for the People Act? And look, the carve-out exception is not something that's just out of the sky. I mean, this has precedent. We've seen it in numerous different in situations. And so I want to throw that question out to you all.
But sorry, I just want to clarify a little bit, Mike. Do you mean carve out in the sense that they try to maybe throw it in a reconciliation bill, infrastructure bill, like, or just like kind of like just try to stick whatever pieces they can in there?
Yes. And again, when we're looking at the precedents for this, the only way forward in terms of protecting the right to vote, to me, remains in this solution of having a carve out. When we look at examples in the past, the Senate has made carve out exemptions to its supermajority vote rule by precedent. For instance, in situations where there are presidential appointments, by rulemaking, for instance, when it comes down to budget reconciliation. And so a new precedent could carve out legislation that would vindicate the Constitution's guarantee clause. Guarantee clause. And so, in terms of where this authority comes from, Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution says the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a Republican form of government. And then when you look at some commentary that was done on this subject, commentary on the National Constitution Center's website explains, at its core, the guarantee clause provides for majority rule. So a Republican government is one in which the people govern through elections. So this exception would be a flexible precedent of the Senate's constitutional power over elections legislation. And then the Senate could over time procedurally determine the carve-out scope. How far is it going to go? So I want to get your thoughts on that idea.
You kind of went into the weeds on that one, Mike. You might be by yourself. You went into some deep parliamentary procedure type. No, I think the idea of a carve-out is really well, like how that actually gets executed and kind of expanding out to the filibuster. For me, I'm just curious. I haven't really done much research into the filibuster. It just seems like to me, much people aren't doing much consideration as to what could the Republicans do without a filibuster? What could they do with a simple majority? Like everyone's just thinking, all right, we got it for like 2 more years. Let's get rid of filibuster. And like you may be giving up 2 years so they can have 4 and really do. So I don't know. I just like to, I don't hear the counterpart to the filibuster argument discussed really among Democratic circles.
I would say that if it were the GOP, they would have gotten rid of the filibuster by now. They're really good at getting their policies pushed forward, despite these policies being unpopular within the majority of the country. So, like I said earlier, the Democrats really need to do some hard thinking and get aggressive. The carve-out would be a great option. Even just getting rid of the filibuster. Temporarily, I'm not sure if that's a possibility, but yeah, go for it, I say.
Yeah, and this is a really important thing. This is one issue where we actually saw members of Congress get arrested. Sheila Jackson Lee, Hank Johnson. We've seen the Democratic Texas lawmakers flee their state to come to the Capitol to make a statement and make a point. So there's a lot of skin in the game when it comes down to this issue. So even though this may seem like a desperate attempt, I mean, if we're not going to get this done, like Tia said, there's nothing else on the table. If you can't allow citizens to vote freely without having to go through all these obstacles. Remember, look, states after states are passing these laws. And so the stage is being set right now for the midterms and for the next presidential election. But I do want to pivot as we're moving along with time to another topic that's very closely related to the one we just discussed, and that is pertaining to how a group of 9 moderate or rebellious centrist Democrats made a deal with Speaker Pelosi, or a deal if you'd like to call it a deal. This was an interesting story because we have a situation where Democrats who pride themselves in getting things done, led by the de facto leader, Representative Josh Gothamer of New Jersey's 5th District, decided to signal for weeks that they had the votes to upend Speaker Nancy Pelosi's carefully laid legislative plans, and they were not going to go quietly away. So Representative Gothamer and 8 allies indicated privately, and then verbally, privately and then publicly, that they wanted an immediate vote on the Senate's infrastructure bill and would actually tank the budget if they did not get their way. So this past Tuesday, Gothamer and his group pulled off what days ago seemed unexpected when Speaker Pelosi actually praised them for their enthusiasm in a public statement while announcing her commitment to pass the infrastructure bill by September 27th. So the date is on the calendar. So just 24 hours before the vote, no one on the Hill knew how this would end. Pelosi, she doesn't really respond to demands, especially when it comes down from her rank and file members. She was not in a rush, but in a private leadership call this past Sunday, House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer and House Majority Whip Jim Clyburn made it clear that the longtime Democratic leadership trio had a problem on their hands with this group. And so we see a situation developing. And so my question is, did the group of centrist Democrats actually play a role in forcing the hand of the House leadership in this way? Did they force their hand in getting a promise included in drafting the $3.5 trillion social spending package and getting a date for the infrastructure vote?
Well, let's just be clear on one thing. The plan all along was that there was going to be the bipartisan infrastructure package and the reconciliation package voted on at the same time. That was always going to be the plan. That way the moderates could get their bill, and the progressives who wanted to spend money not just on roads and bridges, but on pipes, electricity, and childcare would also get their way. So this was always going to be the plan. But Representatives Gottheimer and Murphy attempted to kind of derail the party agenda. Mainly, the thing they were really asking, one of the big things they were asking for was the tax portion, to keep taxes on the wealthy lower, and also to lower the money on the reconciliation bill. And it was incredibly unnecessary because the deal all along was that both bills were going to be voted on at the same time. But writing reconciliation bills take time because it needs to go through so many committees. But also, it was boneheaded. This was a time when the Biden administration needs a win. The leadership trio needs to be able to say that we're guiding Congress with a steady hand, because that was the whole point of putting them back in leadership in the first place, that they were going to lead and peacefully transition that leadership off to the younger generation of representatives that were coming up behind them. And none of what the things that are in the infrastructure bill are popular. Fixing roads is popular. Fixing bridges is popular. No one wants to be the person to say, I didn't want to spend money to fix the Golden Gate Bridge, so now it fell into the ocean. Bridges are popular. These are free job creation programs. Generally, public work bills overall are popular. None of what Gottheimer and Murphy were trying to organize for is actually popular. But it also is really interesting to me because this is from the wing of the party that brags about how much of team players they are when they send their mailers back home to brag about how they're good Democrats and how they're not the squad because they always vote the party line. But if, these people got all sorts of media praise for being moderate and pragmatic, even as they were trying, to derail the Democratic agenda and do things that don't necessarily pull well with voters. But if this had been the squad, for example, organizing to make sure that certain things in the reconciliation bill stayed in the reconciliation bill, this wouldn't have been the same media response. It was something that didn't need to happen, and it also didn't turn into more respect on the Hill for these representatives, because now they kind of seem to be the kids in the classroom that no one wants to play with at recess.
Yeah, and sorry. I wanted to say really. No,
go ahead.
I appreciate it. For me, I appreciate, this is not really to my larger point, but I appreciate individual representatives doing what's best for their constituents, not the I like when they put their constituents before the Democratic Party. I'm not sure if that's heresy among political diehards, but for me, it just doesn't make sense. So if Sinema and Manchin are worried about their constituents, that's the Republican. That goes back to Article 4, what Mike was saying. It's about a Republican form of government. So, and you have to use leverage. Of course, you have to, compromising you can to get things done. But at the end of the day, if you have to draw on the line for your constituents, that's where your loyalties lies. So I like to see when representatives flex their muscle for their constituents, because I think we need more of it.
I mean, even back to Nathan's point, where you're talking about individuals that are causing problems for no reason. This is what Pelosi does, right? She knows, she has the experience of dealing with children that are throwing tantrums. She knows how to pacify them. She knows how to put them in the corner and let them kind of stew and brew and kind of give them that, here you go. I'll give you this little bit and I'm going to go ahead and keep doing what I need to do. That's what she does. This is what makes her brilliant, at the reason why she is still speaker, why time after time people are going to support her and they're going to back her, because they know that she is playing it very level-headed and she's not just thinking about right now. A lot of these younger members are literally playing checkers while older people around them are playing chess. And you have the Democratic Party, the Republican Party that's just like, y'all know what, while y'all are doing all this fighting, we're going to be over here trying to make sure that we can take y'all election votes, make it harder for Big Mama and her cousin and the rest of them to go vote and do what they need to do, because y'all can't be on one accord. And, this is why I love Nancy Pelosi. This is why she's the baddest. This is why she's the boss, because you're gonna have people that do this often whenever there's a big vote, but she knows how to play the game. So they're playing with a master, and they just didn't know that she was just going to give it to them the way that they needed it.
Ismail, to your point, you were saying you were applauding them for basically advocating for their constituents, but what happens when your constituents are consistently voting against their own best interest? That's personally, not to say that I know what's best for the people in that area, but me personally, I feel that's the things that they were advocating for weren't as necessary as the things that were already in the infrastructure bill.
Right. I think that's when I love philosophy, so I'll go there with you. But I think that's when you get to a deep philosophical question of, do you vote for a person, or do you allow a person? Do you know what's best for a person, or do you let them choose what's best for themselves? So I think that's one of those questions where we're not going to hash it out in the little time we have left. But I think the role they're called to do is to represent the people because that's what, at the end of the day, that's what we should, want if we want a constitutional government, is for the people that we elect to reflect the interests of the majority of people that elected them. Or at least, I don't know, it's just complicated, but I definitely hear your point, and it's a good one, but it's a tough one to figure all the way out.
I mean, by and large, most of these people are from solidly Democratic districts. So what they want is for the Biden agenda to pass, right? The average voter isn't worried about the fiscal cliff, right? Because if I find a person on the street or the person at my gas station and say, hey, what do you think about the fiscal cliff? They'll look at me and be like, what are you talking about? And that's what the crux of this was. We want an early vote on a bill that's already going to get a vote. We want certain concessions as it comes to the fiscal cliff and the budget. But the whole point, the budget is the budget, the reconciliation bill got that high number because Bernie Sanders knew Biden wanted a high number. So he said, so knowing that, he went out and he did his part in negotiations to make sure that the size of this bill would start at $3.5 trillion. They want to bring that down now, and now because of them, it's going to come down. But the $3.5 trillion was popular among Democrats, and that's who really needs to be impressed, especially heading into a midterm year, where the enthusiasm gap among Republicans is really high. So they want to, where they're focusing on taking back the House, taking back the Senate. And personally, I'm not really that interested in seeing a world where House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is holding impeachment votes led by Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert. But also, like, the American Jobs Plan, which is, I think, this infrastructure bill, both bills combined, is incredibly popular, both not just among Democrats, but also among Republicans and independents. So holding this up isn't actually doing much for your actual constituents who want the bill to be passed, and understand that for the bill to be passed, there's going to be a bipartisan bill that is for traditional infrastructure, your roads, your bridges, your schools, and also for other things that help ensure smooth infrastructure, childcare, pipes, the other stuff.
And they're consistently protecting the wealthy. I feel they're consistently protecting the wealthy and the 1%. When if we introduce a wealth tax, half of this could be paid for already. So it's just frustrating to see consistently just voting, I guess, or advocating against the everyday people.
So right. I like to pose a question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
This might be
I was going to ask Jasmine a question. Okay, yeah, no, go for it, Mike. Go for it.
So I want to ask. We were talking about the centrist Democrats. Did this group of centrist Democrats actually really did they expend too much of their political capital over a calendar fight when there's a bigger picture at stake, and that bigger picture is going to be the debate we have in terms of the size and scope of the social spending package that's yet to happen. Nate mentioned Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders right now, he's looking at the fact that he may be facing, being in the minority party again, and he's pursuing his own two-track strategy. And so Sanders is trying to sell Republican voters on Democrats' agenda in hopes of increasing popular support for the historic spending push, while also coaxing his own moderate Democratic colleagues to support one of the largest federal expansions of benefit programs ever. So did this group of moderate centrists actually waste capital that they could have used later on?
Absolutely.
I wouldn't say so. No.
They were fighting over scheduling the vote and for tax cuts for the wealthy. Tax cuts for the wealthy don't pull well among anybody, but the vote was always going to be scheduled when both bills happened. Everyone did their part, and then when the people who brag about how they're team players and always support the agenda decide that, now we want to fight over things that normally we would expect our friends and counterparts across the aisle to be supporting, it starts to look a little funny in the light.
Yeah, and I think this does go to the question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, no, actually, I don't think that they wasted too much capital on this. I think that they like to flex the power that they have just for the sake of it. They have that demeanor about them, like Manchin and Sinema. Sometimes I see Manchin likes to say no just for the heck of it. And I think we give them too much power by letting them have a say on things just because they're moderate, just because they like to seem like they're team players. But in my opinion, they're not so much moderate Democrats. They're more so right-leaning, in my opinion.
Wow. Yeah. So I just kind of getting back to the bill, like why these group of Democrats are in the right, because I'm sure they wanted to have this bill on the desk as soon as possible. But Nancy Pelosi and keeping these two bills paired together is a complete mistake in my part. And so that's what the question I kind of want to pose to sorry, the name's kind of popped up on my screen, Jasmine, right? To Jasmine was that if Nancy Pelosi is such this tactical master, what is the benefit and the strategy behind delaying this infrastructure bill that's already passed the contentious Senate? It's waiting for Joe Biden to sign it. So we're just going to sideline this $1.5 trillion or 1.9, I forget the exact number, for 30 days. That kind of money could be already creating more jobs in the economy. For what like great reason is Miss Pelosi holding up the bill for? Like, I don't understand that.
Because there are also other bills that are going to come after this that also need time and consideration to, like, she's not, what I think a lot of people don't understand is a lot of this stuff is like, it's like a symphony. Everything has to go a certain way to create this beautiful song. And once you have all this stuff being thrown in the mix, one note can turn everything upside down. And while you're being focused, you're being nearsighted, her vision has to be open to wider things and other bills and other type of like negotiations and different things like that to help push along a bunch of other stuff that we don't even know about that can come up. There's a whole agenda that her and Steny Hoyer have that is bigger, is not just to please Joe Biden. They also have other stuff that they're working on that matters as well.
But also on the White House.
Of course. Sorry. Now I'll get this one point in. It's just that you can pass that bill when it comes along. Everyone on the panel just admitted that we're holding on to a slim majority and elections are coming up. So they're playing pity pat for a long-term goal when you should only be thinking election to election, at least why the margins are this tight to keep a majority. So that's why this decision is just really confounding, because she's kind of maybe overplaying her hand a little bit, Nancy Pelosi, thinking she's like, maybe she didn't got too many compliments and then really like, maybe then not lost a step, but she may got tagged off base on this one, because this bill needed to be put forward because it's passed by the Senate. You have the majority in the House. There is no Manchin, and these 10 Democrats wasn't putting up a fuss to keep the bill from passing. They wanted it passed sooner. So they're on the right side. So it's not like you're going to lose numbers by trying to pass it quicker. So I just don't see the defense for Nancy Pelosi holding up the bill for a month. It must be something else behind the scenes, because I don't see on its face how it's helpful, especially to the American people. For this money, until it's law, it can't help anyone. So she's foregoing helping people for a long-term plan that she may not get to achieve if she loses the majority for not helping people. So that's why I'm a little bit stuck yet.
Well, if you remember, this was all supposed to be one bill. Back in March, when Biden first proposed the American Jobs Plan, it was big money. It was a big government spending bill that would address infrastructure in all senses, not just in the traditional sense of roads and bridges. Now, Senate Republicans, of course, said absolutely not. We're not going to let that pass. So the Biden White House spent months negotiating with a bipartisan group of senators and representatives so that they could come to a consensus on the Senate passed the smaller bipartisan bill, which is just for roads and bridges, and everything else that Biden wanted, and the rest of the caucus as well: the childcare, the schools, the pipes, the green jobs, all of it. So of course, when Biden announced that he was going to keep working with these people, this was pretty unpopular among most of the caucus, because they had just passed the reconciliation bill with zero Republican support that turned out to be pretty popular. Working families are getting extra money now through the child tax credit. The stimulus money has been dispersed. This bill turned out to be really popular. So they said, if we can do this by ourselves again, why are we wasting time negotiating? So then eventually the Congressional Progressive Caucus came to a conclusion, which, by the way, was supported by House leadership, that it would be pointless to pass a bill for creating jobs to make sure America's infrastructure was doing fine without passing the supporting bill that also talks to the other parts of infrastructure, the community-centered parts of infrastructure, like making sure the people who get these jobs working to build the roads and the bridges and the schools and the pipes can find affordable childcare and can get good insurance where dental and vision is covered by Medicare and Medicaid, because that's a portion of the Senate bill. So this is the way that gets every bit of so passing them both at the same time gets every bit of what Joe Biden wanted done at the same time, even in two bills. So Democrats both get to say that they got to reach across the aisle to work on something, plus that they passed the big, expensive bill that they wanted to pass.
But right now, the Democrats are the only ones stopping them from doing that, though. Like, Democrats are got in their own way, because the infrastructure bill could be passed and we could be on to the record. You may have wanted them to be in the same bill, but they're not. So hold them up just because you want them to pass the same. Sorry.
Well, you're also forgetting that on the other side of you're also forgetting that on the other side of the chamber are people like Mitch McConnell, right? So in order to make sure that he's not going to pull a fast one,
we're in the House right now. We're in the House though with the
True, but the reconciliation bill has to head back to the Senate.
We're talking about the
after
House
it finishes,
you know?
And if any changes are made to the Senate bill, they have to head back to the Senate as well. So, if we have to make sure that
the only party holding the infrastructure bill is the Democrats.
Well, yeah, by choice and by design. It's not like they're waiting until next November to pass the thing. The vote's going to happen in September. The vote's going to happen in September anyways. The vote was always going to be scheduled when it was going to be scheduled.
September's next week, by the way, so it's coming. Yeah, like September.
The bipartisan bill was always going to be voted on when it was going to be voted on. Maybe they gained a few days, but they were always going to get the vote. They just wanted to kind of get their names in the press.
Gentlemen, we are running out of time, and I do want to transition to another topic that pertains to the DOJ, the Department of Justice. This week did something very strange. They passed up the chance to appeal a judge's order blocking a congressionally created program supported by President Joe Biden from going into effect. So the Biden administration faced a deadline this past Monday to appeal the first of three preliminary injunctions that federal judges have issued against provisions in a March COVID-19 aid bill, which created $4 billion, a $4 billion program aimed at forgiving the debt of minority farmers. So while the DOJ has filed appeals within hours to defend the administration's high-profile priorities in areas like immigration, this time, in this instance, the federal government lawyers allowed the 60-day appeal period to run out. And so the United States government, will continue to fight these lawsuits in the district courts in the weeks and months ahead, according to a USDA spokesman. But I do want to ask, why do you think there's some hesitancy by the Department of Justice and the Biden administration to not appeal, when it comes down to these injunctions in place?
Because they know they can't win.
I think it also comes
I can elaborate if you like.
Continue.
It's in constitutional law, if a statute is discriminatory based on race on its face, it gets strict scrutiny by the Supreme Court, which means that. Sorry, I already forgot. I took the bar, but I already forgot the rule. You have to have. It has to be a compelling state interest necessary. So I didn't really forget it all from the bar, but yeah. So it's really tough.
And when we're talking about preliminary injunctions, another element that you have to prove is that the public would be served by this preliminary injunction if it's answered. You have to show that you have to show that this measure is specifically tailored to address the harm or the potential harm that the plaintiff is alleging. And so you have a situation where the DOJ does seem apprehensive about appealing. They let the 60-day period run out. And so I'm trying to get at what considerations, political, legal, may have come into play to allow the lawyers to make such a decision.
Well, I think first off, if we're talking constitutionally and strict scrutiny, you have to work really hard to point out say that this provision of this bill is discriminatory, because white farmers got money under the American Rescue Plan as well. But as far as hesitancy to appeal politically, one person who this hurts very much is Raphael Warnock of Georgia, because specifically this is the big provision that he put into the American Rescue Plan, because he was looking out for his peanut farmers back in Georgia. But I think it kind of speaks to, it reflects on the style of Merrick Garland in his personal capacity. Ideologically, he tends to be more of an institutionalist, so he relies more on precedent when what needs to be done is reform in the Justice Department. But it kind of also speaks to the fact that the Biden administration often just chooses to keep things comfortable as opposed to fighting the fights that need to be fought.
Merrick Garland can only enforce the laws; he can't rewrite them. So he's kind of restricted.
Well, no, he can't rewrite them, but he's the head of the department that's supposed to be fighting these bills in federal court, especially on behalf of the administration. So this provision, if they were fighting it in court before and now suddenly they decide we don't want to fight this, it also kind of flies in the face of Biden's promise to stand by minority communities. So honestly, there are a lot of decisions that Garland has made that have had me absolutely scratching my head. But I also know that Biden has promised an independent Justice Department. So he himself is not going to fully get involved and be calling people on the phone and yelling at them. So we're kind of in this weird limbo where the Justice Department is independent like it's supposed to be, but it's not quite doing the things that we want the Justice Department to be doing.
And again, the groups that are opposing this $4 billion program to forgive the debt of minority farmers include libertarian farmers and conservative farmers. And so that's also coming into play here, and also should be considered. But the last 9 minutes on the program, I do want to turn to the topic that is on the forefront at the moment, and that is the crisis in Afghanistan. The Biden administration, of course, has said, look, we're taking the blowback because of the chaotic scenes. That was the conversation last week. This week, we're going to talk about the success of the evacuations. We're going to keep touting the numbers. And I've been seeing the president's Instagram page, his Facebook page. I've been seeing his Twitter handle put out the numbers every day this week about how many evacuees have boarded these U.S. aircrafts and departed that country. Now, you did have a situation today, early this morning or last night, where there was a bomb that went off near the Kabul airport. And some U.S. servicemen have died as a result of that. The administration has continued to receive more criticism. The president was asked today when he came out this afternoon, shortly before this program went live, and made a statement. And some of the questions, he really took the last reporter whose questions he took, challenged him. And Biden, I believe, specifically chose him for that reason. And the reporter said to him, since you said the buck stops with you, do you take ownership of all of the deaths that have taken place? Do you take ownership of the chaos that has unfolded, and including the bombing that happened recently? And he said, look, I take consideration of everything. I mean, I take ownership of everything, responsibility of everything. But what we have to understand is President Trump made this deal that we were supposed to leave on the 1st of May. I've allowed more time to expire so that we can do this a little bit better than he would have if he were still in charge. I want to get your response because you do have Senator Lindsey Graham, I believe this past Friday or Saturday, call for Biden's impeachment if there were no specific measures in place, and the conditions were that the president has to allow the full force and might of the military to be utilized if the terrorists do continue to attack, the United States in the midst of this departure, this withdrawal. I want to get your response to Senator Lindsey Graham's call for impeachment in that respect, if those conditions are met, and I want to get your response on the Biden administration's handling right now or response to the ongoing evacuations.
Well, first, I'd like to say that I think that President Biden is showing real political bravery throughout all of this. He said that the buck stops with him, and that's what he's been displaying through great detriment to his approval ratings, to his image overseas, and what other people are saying about us. This war has been lost, and our occupation in Afghanistan has gone on long enough. And so I think it's very brave of him to keep this promise that was made. And as regards to Lindsey Graham and what he has to say. He hasn't shown much political bravery, in my opinion, in recent years, and I would just, try to ignore what's been said. America has committed great atrocities in Afghanistan, and getting our people out, to me, is one of our top priorities. Despite the things that we have done, and the attack that was the assault that was made against the evacuees, I feel was also very risky, especially since we have committed to already leaving, and sort of adding oil onto the fire of this promise that we said we were going to leave. So to kind of antagonize the American military, even after we said we're going to leave, is not a smart move, in my opinion. It could antagonize things more and prevent our departure.
I wouldn't take too much of what Lindsey Graham say serious. Let's just be clear. Kind of what Tia just said. Coming from a president that didn't take responsibility for anything, this is, I'm not saying like we have to be kissing Joe Biden's feet and calling him the next Messiah, but I mean, we just need to be real. How many times have we been in situations, or just like everyday people, how many times have you been in situations where you see things happening in front of your eyes and it literally goes from something very small and it explodes to something bigger, right? They constantly talk about the fact that they did not, the intel that they had didn't even say anything about this snowballing the way that it did to be where we are now, right? In terms of like touting the fact that they've won and showing the numbers for all of the stuff, I mean, all of the people that are being evacuated. I mean, that's a part of the job. You want to show that you're doing, like, the work that you're doing is important, that you're having some results, and you want to show the American people what those results are. But when we're talking about the American people that are still losing their lives from something that, we've been in Afghanistan for 20 plus years, it doesn't sit well with my spirit. I don't know about a lot of people that may be on the call or that may be watching this, but I'm tired of hearing about Americans losing their lives. We came in here trying to help y'all, trying to make sure that y'all government is straight. I'm talking to people that may not understand all of the fancy jargon that we're talking about, right? I'm talking to my mom or my cousin that may be watching. Like, America went into Afghanistan because of all of this other hoopla, right? But then they stayed and tried to help their military get situated and be straight and give them the tools that they needed. This is what the people that I talk to daily, this is what they say. We tried to make sure that they had the tools that they needed to be able to thrive and run their own government without corruption and so on and so forth. But that didn't happen, because when you're in a situation and your back is against the wall, if it's me dying or staying here, I'm about to go. I'll see y'all later. There's no reason for me to still be here. And a lot of those people that have helped us are now asking for that same help in return. So they do need to be evacuated. I think what we have to think about is that there are so many layers to a lot of this stuff. And when you don't have federal agencies talking to each other, you get the result of what you're getting right now. The State Department not talking to the military folks, a lot of that stuff gets lost in translation, and it results in a lot of chaos that we're seeing now played out over the last few weeks.
Right, and you have to lay that chaos at Joe Biden's feet. He controls the military, he controls the State Department, he controls the Department of Justice. The fact that this plan has led to the death of 4 U.S. Marines, this is an epic scandal, and it's going to be for months. This went from being maybe just a top issue that could have been handled better to a legitimate scandal for the Democratic Party. And to try to frame it as anything else is, I feel like, really, it can't be done, to me, like, reasonably. And to also to try to portray the U.S. involvement in Afghanistan as somewhat altruistic, as them trying to help the government. Like, they never asked nobody to come over there, and America is not the world police. So the fact that they chose Afghanistan to try to help them, why not help the people in your own country before you go to try to help somebody else? So, like, it's indefensible why you're there. Yeah, but as far as the Marines dying, that changes this entire. I listened to a bit of the conversation you guys had last week, but those Marines, now American soldiers have died from a plan that you said Trump promised to retreat, but Biden pushed it back. He could have pushed it back further, and then maybe those U.S. I'm not going to go that far because I feel like that may be unfair to, because things that have happened, I don't believe could have happened another way, but it's going to become something much bigger than Biden would have hoped
I would
for.
say that clearly they're impatient for us to leave based on the assault that happened recently. And Biden, I mean, right now, I think that him committing to this promise of us leaving is a noble one. We, like you said, we are not altruistic.
Sorry, I didn't hear what you said was noble. What did Biden do that was noble?
I said committing to his promise to leaving, I feel like is a noble thing to do. Because he didn't have to keep that promise. There's previous presidents that have said we are going to leave and have pushed it back. And so for him to stick to this and actually do it is good in my opinion. But right now we don't know just how bad Trump has screwed the pooch on this with this promise of meeting with Taliban leaders and making promises.
Trump hasn't been the president for more than a year. Trump hasn't been the president for more than a year though.
But the effects of his presidency,
yes.
I was going to say, the effects of his presidency have left a lasting.
Biden could have unilaterally changed the date. He did not have to keep Trump's promise if he thought it would endanger American lives.
They're impatient. They are impatient for us to leave, for our occupation to end. And so,
it's
impatience or American lives.
It's also important to mention that up until today's attack, not a single American life had been lost in the evacuation. I think we're all forgetting that. That's not something that gets eyeballs on MSNBC and CNN or clicks on the New York Times and Washington Post. But up until today, not a single American life had been lost to the withdrawal. That's something that the Biden administration was very proud of. Now, today,
how did the 4 U.S. Marines die?
Up until today.
But there was also this, and this is something that they've been talking about a lot on the news, is how the Taliban and some of these other groups were saying that they will hold off until after we leave, and then this attack, and there are planned to be more attacks. So first of all, CNN is like touting this thing of like, oh well, we should believe them, and they're saying that they're going to wait till Americans leave. No, baby, I don't believe nobody that sit up here and cause harm to people for no reason. Like you're literally. And now they're showing it on CNN. Like it's disturbing, but it's also just like you literally cannot just uproot people out of a place in like a matter of days or weeks. This is something that takes planning because there are so many different layers to evacuating people, a large amount of people out of a place like this that have been here for 20 years preoccupying this space. Like you have multiple, like there's so many layers. It's just hard to just talk about all of that and not explaining that.
I do want to add as we're concluding. We talked about a lot, and when we're looking at this war, this is the longest war America has had. 20 years. We're talking about the span of 4 presidencies. Obama wanted to scale back this war and draw it back. He was told by the military personnel, look, if we can increase military personnel, service members in this particular region, we can actually have a chance of turning the tide here. He attempted to do it. It was not successful in 2009 and in 2010. President Trump comes in there with the promise of basically obliterating the Taliban and everything, and obliterating ISIS. That did not happen. And so the question at this point is, for any foreign conflict, what is the United States objective? What is our objective at this point? And I believe that President Biden did an effective job in reminding, repeatedly during this. I believe we're now in the 8th month of his presidency, or gearing up to the 8th month of or a little bit past the 8th month. He said our objective was in 2001 to get Osama bin Laden, to get those who attacked us, and to mitigate the chances that the Taliban would attack the United States. And at this point in the game, and also consider the fact that the Afghan government has abdicated its responsibility. You have the president of Afghanistan leaving the country as the Taliban were storming through his palace, taking pictures with their AK-47s. If the government is not willing to step up to the plate and and take on their responsibility, what is the justification now for staying in there another 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Is it just to maintain the status quo, to keep equilibrium? Because the Taliban was not going anywhere. And so I think, taking that balcony perspective, I mean, like Tia said, I do believe, I agree. I believe that President Biden knew he could either continue to defer to another president, another administration, or he could be the one to end it here. Especially as someone who's the father of someone who was in the military. So I think that was good. Also, public opinion has always been against this war for the majority of the time. You're looking at 69% of Democrats approving the president's decision to pull troops from Afghanistan. And this is down from 84% in April. Republican support dropped to 31% from 52%. Independent from 66% to 41%. So, I mean, look, the fact that you have this broad of a consensus for something like withdrawing, of course, we can wish that things turn out differently. But at this point in the game, 20 years in, very little to show for it, other than the fact that the United States has reduced its the chances of the Taliban attacking the homeland. I do think it was time to leave. But I do want to, Tia, I think I'm going to have you make the last point, and then I'm going to conclude.
I'm sorry, what was that?
You're going to say something?
Oh, I think to what Jasmine was saying, to be fair, these citizens and the American citizens and Afghans related kind of knew that this evacuation was coming. They had a chance to leave, and it was known for a while based on the deals that Trump has made and some of the talks that Biden was having publicly through the press. So not to put all the blame on them and not to put all the blame on Biden. There are nuances to this situation. But once again, I feel
she got disconnected. But, I just wanted to say in the last few seconds, the fact that the Republicans are attacking Biden on national security, to me, is rich, because you have a health crisis right here that they're abdicating their responsibility for. You have governors refusing to enact mandates that force, schools to enact these mass mandates. You have, at the same time, they're making sure that they're taking precautions with their own health, like Governor Greg Abbott. You have a situation where they're criticizing the president for something they themselves are failing to do. And national security goes beyond just terrorism. You're talking about health, the health crisis that's taken the lives of many people in this country. But I do want to thank each of you panelists, Nate, Jasmine, Tia, Ismail. It was very spirited, very intense, very thoughtful conversation. I really appreciated it all. And especially at a week like this when there's so much to talk about. We could have gone on for more time, but we want to thank each of you for the time you did dedicate. I'm very proud to know each of you. Without being said, I'm going to go ahead and conclude episode 43 of the Political Mic podcast. Thank you all for watching.